I just asked you if you thought incest was moral or immoral. What do y'all think? Is it moral or immoral? Can it be either?
Yeah. What? It could be either.
It could be either. Okay, when would it be?
No, I just watched the movie, Midsummer.
Okay.
And, like, I'm not saying it is moral in any,
like good
world, but in those isolated communities where, like, everyone's already cousins.
It's like you can't avoid it, so
yeah,
it's like...
And they're their own community and they're not hurting anyone. So I'm not saying even then, it's not that that is necessarily moral in those communities, but it's not like super immoral in that community.
Okay, well, if you think it's immoral, why do you think it's immoral?
Just wrong.
Well,
Just messed up and wrong.
Messed up. Okay, so a lot of people have that reaction, right? They're like, it's messed up. It seems weird. Right? But why do people say it's wrong? Beyond it's just icky.
It's your caretaker. It's like you're gonna. It's your parents, it's your siblings, it's your family. How can I go?
So there's like a violation of like relationship norms and how a relationship should go. Like if you sleep with your sister or something. Yeah. Why else do people say it's immoral? What's like the number one reason people give that incest is immoral?
If you were to have a baby, the baby would be messed up.
Right. So there's this worry about genetic abnormalities.
Yeah.
Right? And you know that this happens if, well, you look at the scientific evidence and human history, where you look at these dynasties that intermarried and had kids with each other, and then their kids turn out a little weird. So people say, like, look, incest is immoral because it can produce offspring that have disabilities, diseases, etc. Right? Okay, so that's one reason. Another reason is maybe it violates some like relationship norms. Like it goes against like how we think people in certain relationships should behave. Why else? In your little small groups, why else did you say it's immoral, if you said it was immoral? Any other reasons? Or are those like the big two? Okay, well, we're going to talk about this today. And I love that y'all expressed those reasons, because those arguments for incest being immoral is exactly what this philosopher is going to be critiquing today. So, obviously, when we have conversations like this, when we talk about this, we do feel like a sense of disgust or unease, and we think it's icky. But if we're going to say something is moral or immoral, we better have better reasons for that rather than just feeling icky. Right? You can look at a plate of food that I make for you and think it's icky. That doesn't mean eating it is immoral. Right?
Depends on who you ask.
So let's see if we can come up with some reasons, some good justifiable reasons here. Or if we can't, maybe that signals we should think about this problem differently and we should feel differently about it. I'll leave you up to that task. What I'm going to be doing today is just presenting one exploration of this ethical issue. One that is written about by this guy, Jeff Sebo, who is an American philosopher. I believe right now he's teaching at New York University, and he writes on ethics, bioethics, medical ethics, philosophy, law. And he wrote this article a few years ago in which he tries to tackle two of the most common arguments people give for why incest is immoral. And what he tries to show is, yes, sometimes these arguments show that incest is immoral in some cases. But he says it's not obvious that incest is immoral in all cases. So he thinks that maybe a more nuanced, truthful view can be taken on this issue. Trying to go beyond the immediate reaction that we have when we think about brother and sister sleeping together, for example. And the reasons that he investigates are basically the reasons that y'all offered. He says that people generally trot out two arguments to support the idea that incest is immoral. The first one is that, look, you can't let people who are related have sex because one of them might get pregnant and then they might have a kid that has a genetic abnormality, a disease, a disorder, a disability. This isn't good for the kid. This isn't good for society. So it's immoral on those grounds. Incest can produce deformed, quote unquote, offspring, which is bad. This is what he's going to call the genetic argument. The second argument that people often give is, look, incest damages relationships. Like, look at any normal family. If you had a brother and a sister who slept together and that came out, oh, that would whip up a shitstorm, right? Maybe it would damage the relationship between the brother and the sister. They'd never look at each other the same way again. You know, the mom and the dad or whoever it is that are the parents are going to be like, what the hell did you guys do? Why? Our family's never going to be the same, right? So the second argument is that incest damages relationships. That is, sometimes it undermines the family, the emotional center for the individual. What Sebo is going to do in this article that I asked y'all to read for today is investigate these arguments. He's going to try to show where he thinks they go right, where he thinks they go wrong. And he's going to say that if we actually carefully explore this issue, we should probably change our beliefs about incest or some of the other practices that we currently think are immoral. So his goal in this article is to explore the ethics of incest. He's going to argue that these two common arguments given in support of the idea that incest is immoral present us with two horns of a dilemma. This is an idea that you'll see pop up in philosophy articles, books. You'll hear people talk about being on two horns of a dilemma. What does that mean? It means we've logicked our way basically to a state of affairs in which we have to go down one path or the other, but neither path is desirable. Both of the options available to us involve some concessions. They're not good. And he's going to say, if we do think these arguments show that incest is immoral, we should probably modify our beliefs about some other practices people engage in. If we don't think incest is immoral, well, then we need to modify our beliefs about incest. We need to be willing to concede that in some instances it's not immoral, and it may actually be the right thing to do. So, to be logically consistent, he's going to argue that we should either accept some forms of incest as moral, or at least some forms of incest is not immoral, or he's going to say if we condemn incest as immoral for the genetic argument, for the other argument as well, that should lead us to modify some of the other beliefs that we have about what is right and wrong. Because he's going to say, we're being logically inconsistent if we condemn incest and we don't condemn some of these other practices. And we're going to make clear what that is here in a second. But he's going to make a surprising claim in addition to this. He's going to say, if we should choose between one of these options, we should probably choose the first one, as he thinks that it's going to be a less radical shift in our morality than the second one.
That all depends on what things he lists in the second one.
That's exactly what we're going to explore. Okay, so you all ready to get into it?
Yeah.
See how he explores this ethical issue? Well, let's talk about it. The first argument, right, common argument given in support of the idea that incest is immoral is that it might produce offspring with certain diseases, disabilities, disorders. Not only is this going to have a negative impact on the child's quality of life, it's going to have negative impacts on the parents or the caregivers that have to raise them. It's going to be an economic drain on society. All these things. So basically the idea is, look, we don't want to produce kids who have disorders, disabilities, diseases, because that's generally not good for the kid, and it's not going to be good for the parents or society. But notice that this is only a worry for some instances of incest, right? Of course, this is only possible in those instances in which two people who are related have sex and don't use protection, let's say. What about those instances in which a brother and a sister use a condom and she's on the pill? Let's say there's virtually no chance of a child being produced. What about then? Yeah.
Why are they having a relationship with their family in the first place?
Maybe they want to. Why do you love, Karen, who you know is bad for you? Because you love Karen. The heart wants what the heart wants. I don't know. Why does anybody want what they want,
It's a whole other argument.
That's a whole thing. But if there's no possibility of producing a child, of getting pregnant, then
It's still a risk, though.
sure, it's a risk.
Say one of them's infertile.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, what if one of them is infertile? Then there's no possibility of a child that is deformed, quote unquote, being produced. So then this argument doesn't work, right? We would need to bring in another argument to show that it's immoral, right? Another thing that exploring this argument reveals to us is that, look, if we actually think incest is immoral on these grounds, we should also think that certain people who have diseases, who have disabilities, who have certain disorders, they shouldn't be having unprotected sex. We should also think that that's immoral. Why? Because there's a possibility they're going to produce a child with that disease or disorder or disability. So if that's the reason why we think incest is immoral, what about all those normal relationships in which people have sex and they have a propensity for disease, or they have a disability, or they do have a disorder?
So
How come we don't say that's immoral? There's an inconsistency here.
something like if we said someone with depression isn't allowed to have sex because depression can be genetic.
Maybe, if we think depression rises to that level, So do you see the inconsistency here? Generally, we don't have any problem with people in a normal relationship having sex, even if they're, have a genetic disorder or disability, high propensity for disease. We're like, yeah, you can have kids, pass that on. We don't bat an eye. But suddenly when we're talking about brother and sister, we're like, oh no, genetically deformed offspring. So Sebo's like, the majority of people are inconsistent here. If we're going to condemn incest, we should also condemn these actions too. We should also condemn unprotected sex on moral grounds for those who have certain disorders, diseases, disabilities. Furthermore, He says, actually, if you look at incestuous relationships and the probability that they are going to produce a child with a disorder, disease, disability, that's oftentimes much lower than the people in normal relationships producing a normal child. So we're just fine with people who aren't related having unprotected sex and having kids, even though they have a higher risk of passing on things that are going to be like really bad for the child than often incestuous relations do. Thus, it seems that if we condemn incest, we should also argue that people with certain genetic disorders shouldn't be having sex. People with certain disorders, diseases, disabilities. What do y'all think? Are you willing to accept that? And say, look, Lisa, your family has a history of alcoholism, depression. You probably have those genes too. You know, you're anxious, you have poor impulse control, and you have MS. You shouldn't have kids. You shouldn't be having unprotected sex. That's immoral.
It's a sound argument.
What do you? Are you ready to take that on? Accept that? What do you think?
It's a sound argument, but it goes against our beliefs. It goes against all people.
Right. We tend not to want to clamp down, right, on people's reproductive freedom, right? We don't want to say that, oh, if you have a disease or disability, you shouldn't be having unprotected sex. We think that's fine. But Sebo says we got to be logically consistent here. If we condemn incest on these grounds, we should also condemn non-incestuous intercourse on these grounds too. So that's like the first horn of the dilemma. If we think incest is immoral because of this genetic argument, that should also lead us to condemn other sexual practices according to this genetic argument. That's the idea. But, okay, maybe you're willing to concede, look, it's not all about genetics. There are other reasons why we think incest is immoral. Well, let's talk about some of those other arguments. The next one we'll consider is the family argument. The one that says, look, incest is immoral because it undermines the family, it undermines very real familial relationships that are important to individuals, that structure their lives. This is the next argument that Sebo considers. And it makes sense, right? Oftentimes in movies, media, if you've heard about this in your life, you know, a fling between a brother and a sister usually doesn't end well, right? Doesn't usually end well for the brother and or the sister. Or the family, right? Especially if the family finds out. It introduces a whole shitstorm into the family dynamics. But notice not all cases of incest undermine the family. In fact, you can imagine a scenario in which an incestuous relationship brings people closer together. It might not be common, but you can imagine that, right? It's a possibility. So let's say you have a family who thinks incest is cool, and you happen to be raised in this family, and they support incest, and they're like, yeah, you need to get with your cousin Marie, And you're like, I don't want to do that, you're resisting. And then eventually you capitulate. And your family's really happy. And it's all good. And that has brought the family closer together. You're closer with Marie. There you go. In this instance, it didn't undermine the family, right? But even more importantly, a lot of people are not so connected to their family in this way that having incestuous sex would undermine it, or that's something that they should be worried about in the first place. A lot of people are estranged from their parents, right? A lot of people don't really talk to them much anymore, don't care about them. There's nothing to jeopardize here. Not all situations of incest would lead to the damaging of relationships or the undermining of the family. What's there to jeopardize in scenarios like this? So we could say incest is maybe immoral in those circumstances in which it does damage relationships, but we can easily imagine scenarios in which the opposite is true. And Sebo talks about an example in which actually maintaining an incestuous relationship is in the best interest of the couple. I know that sounds crazy, but listen to what he has to say here. This premise neglects situations where incest seems consistent with familial stability. Imagine, for example, the following scenario. Adam and Beth are two successful, independent adults who meet one night and hit things off. They begin to date, and over time, they start to have sex. Within 2 years, they're married. It's love, everything's going well. But then 4 years after the birth of their second son, the unthinkable happens. DNA tests confirm that Adam and Beth are brother and sister separated at birth. They now have two options. They can renounce their love, suppress their sexual desire, and file for divorce, break up the family, or they can continue to live their lives as they always had, accepting and embracing their relationship as both brother-sister and husband-wife. What's the preferable scenario here if you found out that your spouse was actually your sibling separated from you at birth? Should you break up the family, especially if you have kids? What's the right option here, right? Doesn't it seem like, wow, in some weird cases, actually maintaining the incestuous relationship is going to be what's best for everybody involved? Now, maybe you personally couldn't get past this knowledge, but you could imagine some people who could, right? So it seems like there are scenarios in which actually not only does incest not undermine the family, incest has kept the family together. Incest created the family, exactly. Yeah. In this case, which solution would undermine the family more, he asks. If the first premise in the family argument is true, and all instances of incest undermine the family, then they had better select the first option, file for divorce, break up. I suspect, however, that Adam and Beth would be inclined to select the second, and they would have just cause for doing so. After all, they never even met until adulthood, so their childhood bonds are not in peril. The only family in danger is their own. Thus, premise one of the family argument is not necessarily true. There may be cases in which incest is not only consistent with familial stability, but necessary for it. So, there may be cases in which incest doesn't undermine the family. It may be necessary for familial stability. You can imagine cases in which, let's say, a brother and a sister do have sex one night because they're curious, whatever the reason, and they keep it a secret, and they agree to never speak of it again. How would that undermine the family if nobody ever found out? And things just continued as normal, right? Thus, Sebo says, it seems that not all cases of incest are damaging of relationships or undermine the family. So it would seem this argument only holds for some cases. Not all cases of incest are immoral. Some cases of incest may be moral if it's to keep a family together, perhaps. Let's look at one more argument. This is the one that he calls the general prohibition on incest. You're like, okay, I concede the first argument only shows incest is immoral in some cases. I concede the second argument shows incest is only immoral in some cases. But how about this one? Some argue that incest is immoral because while it's not inherently wrong, it tends to turn out badly for people. It tends to produce bad consequences. This would be kind of like a rule utilitarian position, right? Look, 9 times out of 10, it makes things worse. So let's just slap a rule on human behavior and say, in general, don't do this, ladies and gentlemen. Okay? Not good. Don't screw your brother. Okay? Probably not going to be good. Well, what do you think Sebo is going to say about this? Are all cases of incest going to produce bad consequences?
Same stuff usually goes, there's a situational. I don't think I said it's situational.
Right. Look, there are a bunch of cases in which we recognize that a sexual relationship is going to be bad for people, yet we don't tell them it's immoral to engage in it. Don't sleep with him, Shelley. He's not a good guy. He's going to hurt you. Bad. Don't do it. But you wouldn't say that if Shelley slept with him, she did an immoral thing, right? Even if you both know, it might turn out badly. It might blow up the friend group. She might get hurt, right? So why do we say that incest is immoral then? If these other sexual escapades we don't characterize as immoral, even if we are pretty sure it's going to produce bad consequences for the people involved. You tell your friends in the friend group, don't sleep with each other, that's going to complicate things, right? But you wouldn't say, you did an immoral thing by sleeping with Jeff, Sandra. You wouldn't say that, right? At least most people wouldn't.
Yeah, I feel like people's home lives kind of shape how they view the world. And if you are born into a family that thinks like incest is okay, I think that's going to kind of complicate the way you look at other people and other relationships you have.
Sure.
So,
Yeah.
I almost feel like it'd be hard to function as a person in society if you were like coming from a family that it's just like, yeah, incest is normal. Because I don't think a lot of people would share that opinion.
Yeah, a lot of people don't. A lot of people, Sebo is going to say, have a belief that incest is immoral, but this belief is inconsistent with their other beliefs, as he's been trying to show with these other cases, and what people would deem as moral or immoral. But yeah, for sure he would agree. Your education, your conditioning, your family life, yeah, that's going to have a huge impact on this stuff.
So is he arguing that there should be like a law or some sort of like... There is.
A law against incest. He's not going to say there should be a law against it. What he's going to say is, look, if we're going to be logically consistent people about what we say is moral or immoral, either we should condemn incest and these other things that we don't normally condemn, or we should accept them, incest and these things.
Why can't we just stay kind of like neutral, not really have an opinion on it?
You could. You could.
Me personally, like, no, but I think, if somebody else were to engage in it, like, that doesn't affect me. There's 300 million people in this country, 8 billion in the world, like, I'm not going to know. It's not going to change my life.
Oh, right. I mean, it wouldn't really bother me either, if somebody else did that. But what he's trying to reveal is that at the heart of our moral judgments and attitudes, there seem to be these inconsistencies that we don't want to examine or modify. And he's just trying to bring that to light.
I'd say, I think it was Kant, that his thing was you have to do your duty.
Yeah?
And I'd say this violates what your duty is as a your familial duty to each other.
Okay, so you would say you have a duty not to have sex with your sister.
The way that you have to care for them, that would violate the type of care that you have to
Okay.
give to them.
Okay, so like a deontological, like there's like You need to live according to certain principles. Sexual relations with your sibling violates.
I think
Like
the Romans or the Greeks or something back then, they had like 8 different words for love depending on the type of love. Familial love
Right.
was one of them, but it was completely separate from romantic love.
right. Eros, storge, agape. Yeah. Philia, all these different kinds of loves. Yeah. So what Sebo is going to say is that it's not obvious incest is going to make the world a worse place, basically. And it's not obvious that incest makes things worse in some circumstances. So this utilitarian general prohibition on it is not well supported. Again, you can imagine scenarios in which actually allowing incest and not judging people for it may make people happier. Maybe. Right? I don't know. We don't really live in a world where we talk about and do this that much, right? So he says that this rule utilitarian argument is not really a good one. So what's the conclusion? Sebo thinks the majority of people are logically inconsistent in what they think is moral and immoral with regards to sex and reproduction. Common arguments that are brought out against incest only hold in some cases. So he's going to say we shouldn't say incest is inherently immoral. What the common arguments reveal is that, again, there may be some inconsistency in our beliefs, our attitudes, and that we should examine those inconsistencies and reckon with them. What that means is that either we should accept some forms of incest because we accept some people with disorders, disabilities, diseases, having sex and having kids, or we should condemn these practices across the board. Sebo thinks actually accepting some forms of incest as moral is going to be a less radical shift in our beliefs than condemning all of this stuff across the board. Like what came up in the eugenicist article, right? Where Anomaly said, maybe we should prevent people with certain diseases and disabilities from having kids. Y'all kind of said that was icky and you didn't like it, right? So maybe accepting incest would be a less radical shift in your beliefs and in your thinking. It's funny that you asked about Game of Thrones, right? With the Thus, he says, to be consistent, we should not treat incest as inherently immoral. We should say some instances of incest are immoral, some instances are moral, depending on the context. There's not a one-size-fits-all rule here that really works. So do you see the problem that he's trying to make us aware of? These inconsistencies in our beliefs? As people humans generally who think that being rational is a good thing and we should be consistent, Sebo's trying to get us to reckon with these things. So what do you think? Is his reasoning here good?
Well, I also think that the society has an impact on what we think is more normal.
Yeah.
When we were born and everyone told us around us that dating brothers and sisters isn't normal. But if the society in which we lived and accepted it, then maybe it would be considered moral.
Do you think we should try to move towards a place of more acceptance? Or no?
Personally, I don't think so. But
Okay, because you feel it's like wrong, it's icky. I think a lot of y'all feel that way, right? That's a pretty common view.
Do we need anything more than just the innate disgust to think it's wrong?
I would say so.
Because we do that with a lot of things.
Because we think that things are icky that aren't moral or immoral. Right? So things being icky does not mean it's moral or immoral. Right? You might think touching the dirt and bugs is icky. That might trigger your disgust mechanism. That doesn't mean touching the dirt and the bugs is immoral. Right?
You could say that about murder, too.
Yeah. But we have arguments against murder, right? That aren't just people dislike it. It's like, oh, it violates their dignity or it violates their rights, right? Like, these are rational arguments that we bring to bear.
I'd argue it's the same thing.
You think all our attitudes are just like...
I think if we view this like that, then we'd have to view a lot of other issues like that we have steadfast rules about. But we develop those steadfast rules because of the innate disgust.
Ah, okay. So you're saying the rules, the arguments that we bring to bear on these issues, they all come from this disgust ultimately, or this dislike, or this. Okay. But does the fact that we feel disgust or not feel disgust actually tell us if something is moral or immoral?
Maybe.
Because certain things are going to trigger our disgust mechanisms differently, right? Like, not much triggers my disgust mechanism. Because I've done some pretty nasty stuff in my life, intentionally and unintentionally. So, I don't know, not much icks me out. But I would still say, like, a lot of things are moral and immoral, right? For me, that doesn't have to do with what icks me out or doesn't ick me out. I recognize that a lot of things that don't ick me out are immoral. Like, murder doesn't ick me out, but I think murder's immoral, right?
I just don't think it would be very good to, like, become widely accepting of it. Like, you gave that example.
Okay.
Like, there was that example where it was like brother and sister didn't find out till after 4 years of marriage and 2 kids.
Yeah.
Like, I think at that point they're adults. They also met without knowing their brother and sister, so I don't really think that's changing the way they think. But I think when you like start saying like, oh, it's okay if you have incest, whatever, and then it starts to become like a thing, much like other things we've become more accepting of. I think it would influence people to think a certain way.
Okay.
Especially more vulnerable people, and I think if families start to grow from that, it's just there's going to be way too many people that are like this idea that just because we accept it, we should do it. Like, no, we're accepting because of the very specific scenarios where like it's actually going to benefit people.
Right. So you would say something like, if we encourage or accept this, that's going to lead to bad things down the road.
Correct.
That we don't want to deal with.
So like I feel like it's better to just kind of like, like if there are those like very rare cases, like I don't know, like I don't hear about stuff like that too much. I don't think other people do. I think it should just kind of stay that.
It's not very common. Yeah, probably. Well, I don't know. Maybe it's more common than we think, but I don't hear about it. Yeah.
Right. I just think it's better that we don't hear about it because, like, I don't know, the more you accept that, if you put that on the news, like, oh, there was this so-and-so had incest, whatever, like, it's heard about around the town, and then, like, I don't know, I still don't even know if that could, like, become normal in society because I think people hearing about it, like, still the majority would have that disgust or ick. And I don't think there'd be an argument that can like really change that feeling in somebody.
Okay, so the first thing is, if we encourage this, if we normalize it, it's going to lead to bad consequences. So on those grounds, we shouldn't normalize it. But then you're also saying, like, look, it might be impossible for us to like accept it deep down anyway. Like, so trying to normalize it, trying to get people to accept it is a losing battle. Like, maybe just the way humans are wired, we're always going to think this is icky. Yeah? So do you agree with what he says here then at the end then? That we should treat some instances as immoral, maybe some rare instances as fine?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Okay. What do the rest of y'all think? Have you been swayed? Incest is not immoral across the board?
I think that goes with all issues though.
Okay.
Depending on the situation.
Okay, so context does matter.
Context always matters.
Okay.
We can have a general rule, but context will change how we feel about it.
Okay, so you agree with his conclusion then?
Mm-hmm.
Does anybody disagree with it? You're like, nah, bro. Incest is still immoral. It's still icky. I'm not buying it.
It's still disgusting.
It's still disgusting, you say.
It doesn't change my view on that.
Okay, how about the ethics? I've been presupposing there's a distinction between something being icky and something being moral. Do you all buy that distinction?
I still think a lot of our morals come from our instinct of whether something is wrong or not. Like, this is an instinct where we have it's wrong. Much like murder, that's an instinct we have is wrong.
Uh-huh.
You know as a child that murder is bad.
Yeah, probably.
You don't need anyone to teach you that.
But stealing, maybe not so much.
No.
Because children steal from each other all the time, right? That's my toy, smack. They don't seem to have a problem with that. And they need to be taught that that's immoral, right? It doesn't seem like they feel icky about stealing,
No.
right?
But I think stealing comes from not because we think stealing is wrong, not because I think stealing from you is wrong as a child, but you stealing from me is wrong as a child.
Ah, okay. So it's like it's inwardly focused.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But I think that's probably why the rule developed.
Okay. So are y'all ready to, if you still think incest is immoral, are you ready to condemn those other sexual practices people engage in? Like, let's say, look, you have a disability, you have propensity to disease, poor impulse control. Are you willing to say, yeah, it would be immoral for me to bring a child into this world with all those problems, all those challenges?
Again, that's situational.
Because you don't know the kind of child you're going to bring into the world, right? You don't know if they're going to be sick or have a disability or have poor impulse control. Yeah. So you're taking a risk. Is the risk justified, though? It's a hard question.
There's someone who has a family history of cancer, liver disease, MS.
Right.
And all of their parents had it, and they start showing signs of it. Maybe it's immoral.
Maybe it's immoral. So then the question becomes, if we think it's immoral for ourselves to do that, are we ready to make claims on others? Perhaps make laws? Are we ready to say, look, I know it would be immoral for me. That means it would be immoral for you if you're in the same situation. You can't do that. That's where people tend to not go, right? They're unwilling to make public, make wide scale some of the prescriptions that they have for themselves. Maybe think about this. It doesn't matter if you accept the Christian story that we were created by God or the evolutionary story that we all originated from single-celled organisms. Both stories, hidden in them, there's this fact that at some point in human history, incest was in our past, and our ancestors engaged in incest. If we all have the same ancestor, ultimately, doesn't that mean that we're all related a little bit?
At what point do we accept that people are no longer related?
So that's the question. If we are all related, where's the line where we say, if you're X% related, you can't have sex? There's a question for you. Because we are all distantly related in this room, are we not? But, the average person you meet on the street, you wouldn't have a problem, if you were compatible with them, having sex with them, raising a family with them, and so on. But you're technically related to them, right?
What, 2 generations?
I don't know what the law says. Yeah.
I think that's where it's just like people you know as family. That's why I argue you shouldn't be engaging in incest when it's going to change the way you think of other people.
Okay.
The relationships that you already know as family. So if you had a distant cousin that you didn't know was a distant cousin, how many people are actually going to find that out?
Yeah. You may never find that out.
Most people probably aren't going to get DNA tests. So I really just think it's got more to do with how you think about person-to-person relationships, so you can still treat everybody in the proper way.
Yeah, maybe you feel like you are beholden to a more general principle, which is something like, don't have sex and or kids with people that I'm in certain relationship with. Like your neighbor friend who's the opposite sex, who you were raised alongside for 20 years. Maybe you see them like a sister or a brother, and you would think it would be wrong for you to go there with them. Maybe that's a general principle that you follow. There are certain relationships in your life that while you're not strongly related to the person, you just think it would be wrong to go there. Maybe that reasoning is lurking behind your beliefs on incest. I'm not sure. Because if you're related to someone, with that comes the presupposition that you do have this kind of relationship to them, that is different than a potential sexual one. It's of a different nature. In any case, I would encourage y'all to think about this more and talk about this with your friends and family members. Because we should try to be consistent in our sexual and reproductive ethics. If you think the genetic argument is a good one, rationally you should also think some other people shouldn't be having unprotected sex and kids. You should reckon with that. If you do think that's fine, maybe you should reckon with the idea that some cases of incest aren't immoral. But I don't know. I'm going to be honest. I don't know what I believe about this. I just like assigning controversial texts and talking about them because I think that's fun. Does anybody have any final comments, questions, concerns? Doesn't seem like y'all want to say too much more. Maybe you're still wrestling with it, right?
This isn't something any of us know.
Right. It's an interesting issue. Okay, well that's all I have for you. Thank you everybody for coming. I hope you have a wonderful weekend. I will see you on Tuesday.